Have you ever waited so long to play a classic game that you just have zero hype for it? For me, Prince of Persia: Sands of Time has been on my backlog for 19 years. I figured everything special about it had been copied and refined into oblivion since then. Honestly, I expected it to underwhelm me today. I was wrong. Also, I know it's 19 years old, but I'm just gonna call it 20, okay? Okay. In a lot of ways, this plays less like a 20-year-old game than a 2-year-old game. With one notable exception. It's simple, it's linear, it's short. This is becoming an unintentional theme of my channel, but I love these old school, short, linear games. They offer a digestible, carefully crafted experience. Compare the parkour sequences in this to any Assassin's Creed game. Every once in a while, Assassin's Creed will concoct a pretty cool parkour set piece on the critical path. But for the most part, it's just making your way through the streets and rooftops. You almost never reach the excitement or diversity of the parkour challenges in Sands of Time, where every single one of them has been carefully crafted on a linear path. Combined with this, we get tailored pacing between puzzles, parkour, and combat. Sands of Time juggles all three to keep anything from getting too stale. Open world games notoriously struggle with pacing because it's all player dictated. But it doesn't have to be like this. And hey, I don't pretend like I came up with these ideas. I just want to point out how pleasant it is to play games like this. We don't have to accept the open world drudgery forever, y'all. By the way, I've seen some other great videos on this subject recently, which I've linked on screen. Now, I couldn't find the footage of this, but at one point I came across a table with some paper or a scroll or book on it or something, and I couldn't help but think, if this game were made today, I'd probably be stopping to read it. You know, journal entries or something. I hate to say it, but I'm glad I'm not. 2003 don't got time for that. Simple games, baby. But seriously, my issue with that is, when the devs put that sort of content in there, I feel obligated to consume it. Audio logs, written records, whatever. And they're usually value added, but I like the flow being minimally interrupted. So when you don't put that stuff in there, I don't have to feel bad skipping it. More relevant videos on the screen. Okay, so back to the game. I won't recap the whole story here, but it starts when the titular prince steals treasure for his father, which ends up being this magical dagger. It lets the prince manipulate time, including rewinding time and freezing it, which manifests by allowing you to undo fatal mistakes or give you an edge in combat, among other things. Soon after discovering the dagger, his father's vizier tricks him into using it to release the Sands of Time, which ravage the land, turn most of its inhabitants into sand creatures, and triggers the events for the rest of the story. The prince ends up making an uneasy ally with the mysterious Farah, who is the only other human seemingly not turned into a monster, and together they try to survive and turn back the Sands of Time literally and figuratively in a narrative that's rich and original. Okay, so the writing is good. Well, that's our show for today. Thanks everybody for coming out. Make sure you like and comment and subscribe. No, really. The writing here is top shelf. The prince narrates the story to you.
Shall I continue my story from here the next time we're interrupted? Done. I'll start the story from here next time. No. That didn't happen. May I start again? That's not how it happened. That didn't happen. No, that didn't happen either.
These lines are great touches, and things like this give the game real personality. Besides these, we also get periodic recaps by the prince that establish the mood of the game and just add a lot of color and depth to the story and the prince's character.
Scant hours ago, these tables had been filled with men, joking in camaraderie over their evening meal. Just as my father's men do back home in Seraph.
Speaking of personality, the two main characters here are the prince and Farah. I like their characters a lot. The evolution they undergo, the bond that they form throughout the game. My only real gripe is that it's difficult to hear a lot of it. I'll explain more what I mean in a minute. A special call out though, the ending. So good. I was thrilled by it. Honestly, I'm glad no one spoiled it for me 2 decades on, so I'm not going to do it here. But when you realize the source of the frame narrative and the menu settings and the rain, wow. The way everything falls into place is just pitch perfect, and the game ends with a gag that actually made me laugh out loud. So, 19 years old. Oh, sorry, I said I was going to call it 20 years old. Is Sands of Time a little rudimentary by today's standards? Perhaps. But in total, it plays so well. By reputation, the worst part of this game is supposed to be the combat. But truthfully, the combat is pretty strong. The platforming and parkour are a treat. I very much enjoyed the level design. puzzles, make you feel clever for figuring them out, and the controls and animations are smooth and effective. Let's zoom in on that last bit. The animations are supremely good in this game. That this is the case is fitting because the original Prince of Persia game was the first ever made using the technique of rotoscoping, yielding what was at the time unprecedented verisimilitude. How's that for an SAT word? Now, here in 3D, the prince is lifelike and believable. More than that, he makes impossible things seem achievable. It can't be overstated how they just crushed it. They knocked his movement out of the park. And it feels good too. There's none of the flightiness of, say, Super Mario Sunshine, nor any clunkiness that you find in other titles. Sometimes the sound sells the action. Brace yourself for the most specific praise of all time, but one killer sound is when the prince will occasionally grab something from a bit of a jump or fall, and the clasping noise they chose for it is just perfectly suited to the action. Listen. Isn't that a terrific sound? Getting around the environments is sometimes part of the challenge, so we get a first-person and landscape view to take in the areas. And the game is great at teeing up the next area with a little cinematic to introduce an objective or a threat. They strike a nice balance of showing you where you're supposed to go without ever holding your hand and showing you how. The platforming design is smart. They use shadows periodically to telegraph where to jump, which is mega helpful but also elegant. It's nice that he can move blocks side to side as well as fore and aft. Also that he can whip around ladders. These are just little things that you desperately wish your character could do in games even older than this, but also many games today are still stingy about these things. The prince's moves are just a delight to execute and watch. The rhythm, combined with the animations and the tight controls, just makes everything click into place. And the challenges are varied enough that we get to see the devs flex and throw cool ideas at us without ever getting frustrated or bored by them. I mentioned this earlier, but I went into this game expecting the combat to be worse. It has a respectable amount of depth to it though. As you progress, they introduce moves and techniques to keep things interesting, and a number of them emphasize the prince's athleticism, which I thought was a cool touch. Defensively, your guard is pretty solid, although occasionally enemies will hit you with stuff that you can't block, but it wasn't always clear to me what I could and couldn't stop until I'd already been hit. Fortunately, you can even guard on your back, which I don't know why, but that seriously impressed me as a neat inclusion. I also found counter timing to be difficult to pin down, and the enemies do a pretty good job of faking you out, or at least faking me out. Baddies come in a few shapes and sizes, and require you to make the most of your moveset to take them all out. When an enemy's down, you have to retrieve them with your dagger, or eventually they get up to rejoin the fray. In some ways that's executed well, but in other ways it's frustrating. The prince can retrieve from a counter, for instance, and he's usually pretty good at interpreting player commands and cartwheeling around to zap a guy up without too much finessing. However, retrieving the monsters takes precious time, and as the fights get progressively harder, you become more and more likely to get hit while trying to retrieve, which can create cascading annoyances. I also have to note, I think picking on game cameras is a lowbrow form of game criticism, especially since I typically don't have issues with game cameras, but the camera here has some truly harebrained moments. It's been said before, but the combat encounters all seem to last just 1 or 2 waves longer than are called for. But I have a theory on this. My theory is the devs wanted to force you to lean on the rewind mechanic during combat. By making encounters last a long time, they teach you to use the rewind after taking big hits throughout the fight, or else you'll run out of sand and health by the end of a fight and die. That's my theory, and it's not a good or bad thing, it just took getting used to for me. It was never in the forefront of my mind to rewind after getting hit. So for a while, I would get to like a fingernail of health left before I started using my rewind, and then you're just rewinding every time you get hit, which is really annoying. It's not a critique of the game, it just took reprogramming for me. Out of everything in Sands of Time, the combat is the aspect I'm looking forward to the most in the subsequent entries, as I understand that was one of the main focuses of improvement for the sequels. Well, that and making it twisted. Presentation-wise, this game feels ahead of its time. For instance, it does a good job of cutting to slow-mo and cool camera angles to accentuate some of your stunts. And I mentioned the area previews earlier, but you also get visions from the eponymous Sands of Time when you save. I found them well constructed, occasionally helpful, and increasingly they serve gameplay and narrative ends, which is truly cool. I'm still impressed by the lighting and the soft object physics in this game. For the time period and consoles which ran it, it's pretty good. I also didn't realize he slowly loses clothes as the game goes on. ages before the Arkham and Tomb Raider games did it. I guess I could have figured it out based on the box art. I guess I just never really thought about it. But for me, this is one of those things that sets it apart as being truly inspired, and I suspect other games have taken their cues from this one. Now, alright, what follows are a couple of nitpicks I have about the game, but I just want to preface this by saying two things. One, these are primarily minor critiques, which shows the prevailing aspects of the game are great. And two, these might be consequences of the PS3 remaster, as well as the issues that I had with my disc. I will delineate my suspicions about which is which. If you're an experienced gamer, you might always be nosing around levels for secrets and bonus paths. I learned early on, though, that you can't always backtrack in Sands of Time, so you may lose access to the bonus path if you proceed first down the critical path. And based on the layout of the levels, it's not always clear. Sometimes you can reach points of no return without realizing it. Sometimes you're not sure which path is the bonus one, which one is the critical one until you've already gone there. What you're actually seeing here is me reacting to having been burned by this earlier in the game, and I panicked. So what I didn't realize is, if I had just kept running, I would have drank from the magic fountain, increased my overall health, and boom, I'm back to the critical path. But because I'd locked myself out before, I got spooked and reloaded my save. I ended up figuring out what to do, but I caused myself a lot of confusion first. And here's another annoying situation. There was a puzzle I got stuck on where I was supposed to weigh down a switch with a block. You see, the setup is I had to hit the switch and the door on the opposite side of this gauntlet would open. I had to run the gauntlet to go through the door. Only issue being, there was no obvious indication that the door was shutting right away. So I kept getting to the end, seeing the door was shut, and trying and thinking I had to go back and do it again because I wasn't fast enough. It's kind of annoying. It would have been nice for some player feedback. My vote would be just like a 2-second clip of the door closing again after you release the switch. That way you know it's not on a timer. All told, I banged my head against the proverbial wall for like 15 minutes doing this over and over again until I figured out what was wrong. One time I had a bizarre glitch where Farah just died for no reason. This only happened to me once, but you can see I'm waiting for it to happen again here. The mirror puzzle in the library. That frustrated me to no end. I figured out the solution, but it didn't trigger, so I thought I was doing it wrong and I needed to maybe activate all 3 of these symbols simultaneously. But after an hour, I gave up and I looked online because none of it was working, and I found out I was doing it right. So I tried it again, but it still didn't work. The light is reflecting correctly, the target was glowing, you can see it. Anyway, I'm convinced at this point that the game is glitched. I'm SOL. At one point, I even go look at the vision and I realized that, hey, this part is in the vision. I can see I'm doing it right. I wasted hours on this. And here's the solution. Now, I'm not going to pretend like this isn't partially my fault. I could definitely have just dragged the block a little bit further over. But a little bit of polish here could have had the block just slide into the right spot instead of like 1 pixel off or wherever I left it. That would have saved me a lot of trouble. Another thing like this, and again, I'm being really petty, but it's worth noting, there was a part in the beginning where I failed to retrieve the first sand cloud. I didn't know what the sand clouds were for, so I thought maybe you only need them if you aren't already topped off on sand, which I was. So I hit triangle once, nothing happened, and I shrugged and moved on. Similar to how intelligent the game is at retrieving downed monsters at player command, I wish it was that intelligent about trying to retrieve sand clouds. If the game was just a bit more polished, instances like this would be a little bit more forgiving. I think the game is amazing for its age, but stuff like this is just harder to come by in games nowadays. Developers are better at smoothing out little things like this, and it's a testament to the quality of the game that most of my criticisms are little things like this. Also, I encountered a persistent audio glitch. At least I think it was a glitch, where the lots of sounds either don't play at all or they would play quietly. The voices ended up being super hard to hear because they're playing with this indoor echoey effect.
Are you alright?
How long was I out?
Long enough. What if the sand creatures came back?
They won't. Not here anyway.
What are you?
I'll take it right again.
I don't know if the original game suffered from this, and I don't know if this is unique to the HD collection or if this was deliberate on the developer's part. And I don't know if this is maybe unique to my disc and console combination, but in any case, this was my most serious technical gripe with the game. And I seldom turn on subtitles, but this is a perfect scenario where I would have made an exception if there had been a subtitle option. But there's not. Speaking of which, I figured I'd briefly discuss how I played this game in case anyone out there is inspired. There's a wonderful line of PS3 games, which are either HD remasters of classic PS2 series, such as this one, or bundles of classic PS3 era games. I bought a used copy of the Prince of Persia HD Trilogy off eBay. The game's select title screen is a graphic design disaster. Whoever cropped these box art images, whatever. Anyway, petty critique aside, my tech gripes may be because of this port. I can't say for certain. And as always with eBay, your mileage will vary. I've had some surprisingly scratched Blu-ray PS3 discs show up off of eBay, which according to many people on the internet is rare because, don't you know, Blu-rays are mighty hard to scratch. Yeah, well, tell it to my frozen Prince of Persia cutscenes. You might be able to get this off the digital PS3 store, but I haven't checked. Either way, I recommend tracking this down fast, because hard copies are only liable to get more damaged by some dingus, and also more expensive with time. And you never know what Sony is going to do when they finally pull the plug on the PS3 digital store. They threatened to do it once already. Anyway, happy hunting. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one. Also, honestly, avoid spiky poles is just good life advice in general.